Hello, Nicholas.
Hey, Mark.
Not many here today. Let's give it a couple more minutes for people to show up.
Yep.
We should be able to proceed anyway because we always do regardless of who is here. You don't show up, you live with the results.
Okay.
All right.
Good to know. I joined. We could claim that everybody else is just at the Confidential Computing Summit in San Francisco, right? Only the two of us have to do real work, right? So
I'm in San Francisco as well, but it's not starting for another couple of hours, so there is no reason not to dial in. Okay, you know what? Let's proceed. Whoever wants to join will join. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. Okay, let's do it. All right, so I'm trying to put some finishing touches on the document. So let's just go through top to bottom. And there is some stuff in terminology I'll need to figure out with Sal. I made a little change. I didn't want to talk about existing code. I just want to say whatever code. If code is not developed for T's, it may have problems. With your permission, I'll just accept this change.
that's fine. I mean, we always claim and focus that actually existing code can still run in a TAE without change. So
Well, it can, but it doesn't mean that we're going to do a good job.
I'm fine with the change, right?
Yeah. Okay.
Existing code sounds for me more like you need to, if you write new code, you're in trouble, right?
Well, if you write it if you put existing code in a T, but it, like for instance, if your existing code takes traffic over HTTP, you'll be able to see all the traffic. Like you're not actually, or if you cache data in the clear, it's going to be in the clear, or basically you need to secure your input and output channels, and that's what it says. Or if you also don't use the random number generator from the platform, you may find that you are generating bad random numbers. So, or not good random numbers. All right, so Mark will speak to whatever Anjuna does to secure your code if you didn't make any changes. That's his thing. I'm gonna ask them to.
So what is the so what is the key thing Anjuna wants to mention there, or
Anjuna basically says that you give us your workload and we will wrap it inside a trust execution environment and run it. That's his mention of the confidential runtime, and I'm basically saying, okay, we need to stay vendor neutral, but we can add a footnote. That's between I want them to be on the call to discuss that further because it's their business. Let's see. Simon Gallagher. I don't know him, but I want to maybe find out what he meant in this. I need to move past this into things that you and I can discuss. This is kind of, I do not know if I should, okay, this is something I may want to input on. So this verbiage right now, should we worry about data leaks that stem from parameters passed to APIs exposed by trust execution environments and data returned from it? Or I can just remove the sentence.
For me, this is definitely a strong recommendation, right? I mean, we had in the section always these should and must. So I would put a should there. Data flows should ensure not to leak. Something
Yes,
like that.
that is true. Specifically, my question is about parameters passed to APIs exposed and return values. Because like if you expose an API and you have some return values, do you care? I mean, if it's over HTTPS, of course, the transport level security takes care of it. I'm talking about just API.
Yeah,
Because
but I think it is fostering that you encrypt all data in transit, right? If I have encrypted data in transit, I don't see the call and the return, right?
yes,
I only see it for my session, basically. And for my session, how to prevent it, right? If my TLS session, I mean,
yeah. So
so
then,
I would focus on that. It should be set up such that they don't leak. So basically, don't do HTTP.
yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
or
So fair enough.
don't print out plain. And this not contradict this underpins or fosters what I'll always also state is that yes, there is data at rest and data in transit, but you still need, as you introduce data in use, consider to then move, of course, these secrets into that layer as well. Otherwise, you haven't won much in this
Yes.
regard, right?
Okay.
So I think we should put a should there. Data flows should
There is
not
a should.
leak.
There is a should right here.
Right, but intermediate we have a must. So I think it should be a should
No,
or
no,
must per sentence.
cryptographic keys must be securely provisioned. Must is on cryptographic keys and should is on data flows. You see? So
Yeah.
I think we're okay. The next big change, I moved secure dependency management under secure code build to have fewer top-level bullets.
My concern there is that for me, a secure code build is something I do in the life cycle once for each of my versions, right? While the secure dependency management with observing CVEs is something after I build, I have to continuously do. So it's more the question between secure build is for me a milestone to be achieved in a way.
I see.
And secure dependency management is an operation I have running.
Okay, then let's keep it that way, and then I will reject this. So this was a straight copy, and I will explain why I did that later. It has to do with formalizing expectations on in terms of like evidence and whatnot. But it's perfectly fine to keep it that way, and your reasoning is valid. So we'll get back to that. So here I did not. So we talk about the build pipeline itself should utilize confidential computing, but because we cannot be technology specific, I added similar data and use protection technology. So not that they will, but if they want to use, I don't know, use a fully homomorphic encryption compiler, whatever, let them. The whole point is the build pipeline itself should be safeguarded.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's fine. I mean, that's thing in translation for me similar. Yeah. Similar would mean you use actually confidential computing in my translation. So I think, or other, or just data and use protection technology, or alternative data and use protection.
Alternative, maybe.
In German, the similar is just saying it's the same, right?
Yeah, alternative. Let's stay alternative. Okay.
Thank you.
So let's see. So there is a clear bug here. So we talk about generate binaries and configuration settings should be signed. We can have a conversation about whether that's actually a necessary, but certainly not a must. It's just if it's going to be validated by attestation, then tampering like with the binary is not going to be an effective attack. But
Just one, sorry, just one thing. Thinking about it, as you have poked on the secure compile settings, I was just wondering if you are not so much compiling a solution, but combining a solution in case of container or microservices. Would that be considered as self, or should we expand that? So as I put it together components of microservices to build my solution in that secure build, for each of them, I assume compilers have been done, but there might be things where just it's a development to production thing. So I was wondering whether we also, beside the compiler settings, should say something about orchestrating a solution out of components or something.
That would be a separate bullet. Feel free to propose text on that one. Yeah, I don't know exactly how you would say. I intuitively understand what you're trying to say, but it just needs to be. We don't know if it's going to be microservices built. See, that's the thing. Like we know that there's a compilation process, there is a build process that generates some artifacts. Like let's be very, very generic. We just care that the right things happen so that the correct compiler artifacts are produced. But we should never go down to the list to things of like microservices or any other kind of technology. We don't know if we're building a kernel. We don't know if we don't know what we're doing like at this level. We just like
okay.
we know that if you're gonna unleash a compiler on something, there are sometimes compiler settings that will you have to take into consideration that whatever, like it has to be left to the implementer to decide what they are, because it's ultimately at some point it's a conversation between the shop that develops the things and their auditor, right? The shop says these are our practices, this is the documentation of our practices. The auditor says yes, seems like you're doing the right thing, but it's not going to be at this level other than now. But if you're saying that there is stuff outside of compilation in the generation of the build artifacts themselves that you can state in a generic fashion, then that should go here, but only at that very, very high level.
Okay. Yeah. I will find something. It is like Docker build or packaging.
Or maybe just say like let me suggest a wording for you so that everybody understands what we're doing. Hold on, I need to put myself in suggestion mode as well. Something like
that.
Yeah. Instead of yours, we'll just shit. You just do.
Sorry.
Yeah, so we'll just delete that. But like basically saying introduce a paragraph about secure packaging and generating compiler.
Right. You compile something and you link something. I mean, there in the past, there was the linker where you have all the compiles and then you link it together, Marvin and other things, right? And I think we need to add that because, yeah, it opens. It is more generic, right? If somebody has nothing compiled, just some cluing code, right? He still needs to do that, right? Okay.
Yeah, it needs to remain at that very, very high level. Like if you, for instance, if you're not compiling, then the secure compiler settings don't apply to you. You can skip that. Then you can keep it in this text, but if you're not compiling, fine, you don't need compiler settings. But if you're packaging another way, then perhaps you need to pay attention to whatever happens. Okay, so this sentence, like going down below, is what I have problems with, because we need to update AVS policies anyway. If I generated some new binaries, and so my AVS policies need to change. Now we're basically saying incorporate mechanisms that protect code provenance and integrity. So that's what I'm saying. Generated. I don't know. Even though like binaries, maybe it's just artifacts.
Yeah, I think so. Artifacts is
Like,
better because then the compiled artifacts of Bath are basically
right. And then basically, I'm inclined to delete this section because we should not be talking about AVS.
That's fine. I mean, in the past we had the AVS even more as a thing. So the absence. So yeah, that's fine. Let's go with the signatures.
We separately talk about updating. Okay, so we're gonna keep that, and we're gonna keep that. Okay.
Just reject.
Okay. So what just happened?
Okay. Yeah, it is all under your edit, and that's fine. Okay. Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. 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 Cool. So highlight. That. All right. So. Did we mention something about trusted root stores under forces? Let's see. Yeah, I think we already mentioned that. So I'll probably need to talk to Mark about this comment because I don't want to resolve it in his absence. So they were supposed to do that anyway. Okay, so now this is the key. This is what I want to spend most of today's meeting on. And this is to do with, like, you guys put in some text. I have some issues with the text you put in, and this is why I made comments saying that I think I want a different approach.
That's fine.
So okay, so component vendors are not affected. Similarly, I made a comment down here before we get into the application development managers. Hardware owners and managers are also not affected here. This is about payload governance specifically, and we will gonna have separate pattern on things like keeping your hardware properly patched and updating your devices and all this other stuff. This has nothing to do with like basically saying like there is never a compliance requirement for saying, well, make sure you provide enough hardware to run on all your software. That's just not.
But that wasn't the intent of that. The point was that if I want to claim that I did the above, right? I have requirements on my hardware owner to start with. My point is, if I'm claiming to do a secure build, but the infrastructure is not providing a secure environment because I'm doing it in the internet cafe at my corner, right? I cannot claim that. So I do have some dependencies on the owner of the hardware that he provides something or enables me to deploy a confidential application so I can do the secure build we asked before.
Right. That's how it reads to me as well. But okay, so this document really is going to influence the conversation an organization might have with their auditors, right? And the auditor, when they say, how do you govern your payloads? And you say things like, well, we have our secure build chain. So here's some evidence that we securely compiled everything. And these are our coding practices. These are our, dependency management practices. This is all the stuff you say to your auditor. You don't also say, oh, and by the way, look, we have all this hardware available to run all these payloads. That is not part of how you govern your payload. This is like the payload governance really has to do with this. It's scoped to just the bits necessary to produce your artifacts and to deploy them and to make sure that the right thing runs.
Okay. I mean, I'm not the compliance expert, but looking at the other item, it was more by if you scroll up under the 3 secure code build, right?
Yeah.
There we have the point of you need a secure and isolated build pair, or you need the infrastructure, and that was the trigger for adding this, saying, okay, yes. If I should utilize confidential computing or alternative things to safeguard, then as I want to do this, and I claim I do it because it's not a should, but I say I do it, then I have that requirement down there said I need the hardware which can do it, right? I cannot do this on hardware which is not capable to run secure and isolated build practice.
Right, but you see, but like, okay, I'm going to give you more of an absurdist argument here. You don't also talk about the fact that we secured the electrical supply to make sure this hardware has power. Like at some point in time, you need to stop, right?
Okay, so basically, the feedback is this goes one layer too much in technical detail or in detail from your perspective.
It's just basically you're kind of saying the moment you say we have a requirement to have a to run compilers in trust execution environments. That's somebody else's problem to procure it and develop it, and then you simply say, yeah, and here's some evidence that we ran in trust execution environments. That already assumes that, yeah, we went and procured the hardware and we configured it all and we ran it all. There is just evidence that it was done in such a thing.
Okay.
That's why I'm saying, like, there is nothing extra that your hardware people need to do in order to all you need to do is utilize facilities that are already provisioned somewhere.
Okay.
That's why I'm inclined to take this out and basically say not affected much, like there is. I'm not asking the people who design silicon chips to do anything either. Just specifically for me. So
okay.
I'm going to take this out and to they're not doing anything like different here. So let's go back here for a minute. So there is wording that I kind of played with, but then I'm basically this is the kind of stuff that I believe we can expand on it a little bit. But what would go into my I don't know, control my control procedures would be dictated by the statement that I put in here. Establish document and evidence, confidential computing specific, policies, practices, and controls related to considerations outlined in the solution section of the document. Now, we can go down a list, but really this is the key part. You need to have policies. You need to explain what they are. You need to have practices, right, in responsive to those policies. And then you have to controls that ensure that these practices are followed to the extent that policies specify them, right? So that's the conversation with the auditor. Now, what are these policies, practices, and controls? Well, you can go down here through here to solution, and that'll say, okay, so we have encryption, data transit, and at rest. So what are our policies, practices, and controls? What is our random number generation story? Policies, practices, controls. What is our data leak story? again, right? So you have all of these things that you need to speak to. And then we talk about dependency management, similar, right? Build, etc. Now we can say, what the policies, practices, and controls ought to be, but it sounds like we already enumerated all the things that we need in here. So should we be repeating them? I mean, I don't know, but there is certainly an expectation that everything in solutions is going to be addressed.
Yeah. Again, right? I understood the ask or the idea to add here that one more layer on include what each delivers expects from this pattern. And that's why I took the effort to write down more details than needed. That's fine.
I do not know. We can. It's just then we need to make sure we produce kind of this exhaustive list. And I mean, I can go either way on that, but we need to be, we need to be consistent. So I started writing this out in terms of related to safeguarding traffic to and from trust-switching environments, related to acceptable use of RNG, related to standardization of data, for logs, metrics, etc. Dependency management policies and controls. Like this is the kind of stuff that we can leave in here, but it effectively duplicates everything we just said. And we can. This is where I could go both ways.
I agree that to make it consistent, that's where we at one point kind of also stop, because it is really a question how deep. If you want to do it for each of them, I agree that the ratio in this document basically goes towards having a long list in the persona section, right? And I wasn't sure whether this is intended. So I think I mean, you could do appendix for an example, right? Saying, for example, it would be this, but I'm fine. Then let's boil it more down to establish documented evidence, and more of these sentences which start with the verb what somebody needs to do, rather than an intensive list, and basically acknowledge that the idea is he goes up in the previous area and check marks basically the matrix for all of them, rather than us writing up the matrix, right?
So which way do you think is going to be better for the reader? Like we can basically make a checklist here in this section. And, basically, it would mirror everything that was said upstairs, like, up in the solution section, but, perhaps a little bit more succinct.
Well, potentially a bird from days back when I was working as an intern, and I got basically established document and evidence, and then was asked for my employer at that time to build up the table of things what this really needs, right? And then everybody is redoing the table below to saying these are the 5 or 10 most important things to look at. And I do think that if we add less text, later people are more flexible, right? But it's more effort for the auditor to really evaluate whether everything was covered, or depending how he is, whether something was basically left out, right?
Yeah.
I personally think for this document, and given this is basically how many pages, I would make it short. Let's make it short and assume that people are writing up their spreadsheet or controls on their own.
Okay, in that case, I will keep this bullet right here. And then delete pretty much everything here.
But there my only concern would be the last bullet. As I said, for me, established document and evidence, this is fine. This is for me that milestone thing in the solutions section. Okay, because you have there the dependency management, the monitoring is I personally I'm fine with removing the majority, but I really would like to have that monitoring thing to emphasize that this is not a one-shot thing. And I think that's not covered by your established documented evidence policies.
So let's go up here under dependency management. Automated tools must be used to continuously monitor, continuously monitor and manage third-party libraries and dependencies for non-vulnerabilities. Ensure regular updates apply. Strict vetting policy, including signature checks available for adding new dependencies. Dependency management must continue even after the compiled artifacts have been deployed. Something like that.
Yeah, okay. And with that, you basically claim that with the policy practices and controls in the section, this is covered. Okay.
Yes. So then we're okay basically getting rid of this, and they would need to. And again, we can always come back here and say, you know, here's the sort of sum total of evidence you should be producing. We can do that maybe as a separate pass.
Right, or exemplary controls, because I mean, I just observe in the context of DORA and such, right? There is a sentence of saying you need to leverage data in use, and what that then means basically, or what are the controls to prove that you have done it, are basically for each implementation individually. And that's annoying on the other side, right?
That's
okay. So the confidential data owner manager. I think we can remove the not effective at the bullet. That's something.
Let's talk about that. So I don't know why it said not effective. Confidential data owners and managers. Ensure that
so basically you could argue that this is,
so I would again say things like establish, document, and evidence policies, practices, and controls related to whom? Ensuring like that only authorized payloads will get access to that's the data, something
well,
like
I mean, you could argue it's similar to the above, right? That you only give your data to someone who consider it as a confidential application developer and manager, the things mentioned under solution, right?
well,
you may only deploy if it's secure developed, if it is dependency managed, if it's securely code built, and if there's a secure integration deployment.
Yeah, so I had a couple of something because I'm kind of thinking in real time. We can have a pattern, separate pattern document around how to secure data using confidential payloads, and it would all go in there. Or like we can basically the solutions section here talks specifically about payloads. It says nothing about access to data, right? So we can basically just have this one bullet. Or we can have like a pattern document saying, you know, you can secure it using keys and whatever. Like we can maybe go into a separate conversation around what does it mean to have multi-party computation using confidential computing. That may be a pattern in its own right. But like I would just keep this one bullet, and kind of leave it like this. And I would consider perhaps writing a separate document on governing access to data by confidential payloads. And then all of those considerations could go in there. But here, this document is about governing payloads specifically. And by the way, we have a pattern document in line to talk about
so I'm okay with that.
Relying party access. So let me show you just real quick. We have a document that we could be writing, and that I hope to be writing. Where is it? It's in the where is it? Yeah, I'm not gonna find. I'm not gonna find it just yet. But the document is around specifically how to govern, how to govern access by relying parties. So, for instance, every time you deploy a new workload, you're not going to go to a relying party and say, here's the new version, because that's not manageable. So you have to translate. It's going to be in the GRC SIG folder. There we go. And it's going to be under patterns drafts. Relying party access. So this is about data owners getting access to things. So that's the document that we can get into, and we'll be discussing soon.
Okay. I think for me the only thing I would then say that we referenced that you should establish document and evidence based on the access patterns for that given sensitive data set, that we already mentioned that there are different patterns. It is not just always data. It might be IPs, it might be keys, it might be a combination of both, right? Keys to get to data or something like that.
Okay, so
I think by ensuring and basically determine which is the appropriate pattern you're working against, right?
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about what that. So when I say get access to sensitive data, should I specify what the sensitive data means here?
Well, for me, it is not only data, right? It might be keys to then access something, API tokens, and data is for me just to generic or not highlighting that. But that's just my wording here, right? Sensitive data is PIA data or something like that. But there's also IP or things, keys, which you could more explicitly mention that if you have a combination or a confidential payload, which in part is managing keys, which has potentially access with these keys to data, as well as is potentially business IP by its own, then basically the combination of these, it is not just one set of sensitive data you're plugging in an encrypted disk or something like that.
Okay, so how would you rephrase it?
My point was basically just to decide that you classify which sensitive data patterns or sensitive data sets you have. That's all. That we add something like get, rather than saying get access, it's that the key thing that you documented for the classified sensitive data you're working with your workload.
I'm trying to figure out how to turn that into words.
I think my main point is that your policies, practices, and controls may depend on the kind or the the source or the nature of the sensitive data you're using. So that again, it's not just one thing to say, yep, I did something for sensitive data. It might be that you need, depending on your workload, different natures of sensitive data, which are differently controlled, different practices, and you might have more than one practice. I think that's my point. And you can say, then I copy paste all practices and make one super practice. That's given. But the point is, it's not just. I don't.
I'm inclined, in the light of this, to say not affected, but refer the reader to the relying party access control document. Because we're going to talk about all manners of what it means to grant access to to data by a confidential environment in this document.
Okay, if that's the content of the document, then
that's what we ought to do. So that's what I think we should do. So
but I think it should not be a not affected, right? It should be something like, then leave that thing and basically refer to the document, because I think not affected might be something to say a confidential payload has to do nothing, and I disagree there, right? There are aspects where a confidential payload needs to ensure it, because these controls not per se come out of the box, right? Or they will just not work, right? Depending on the access control.
So how about we rename relying party access control policies to relying party access control governance? And then here I'll basically say it's going to be covered under this. And then we basically have a clean separation. Can we live with that?
Could you do me the favor? I mean, part of that was not written by me. If we then throw that part which we had here to be revisited, that it is covered later in that document.
I can move this all
into that other document as something to consider, or other thoughts of.
Yes. So this is now all of your whatever, all this stuff is going to be here now. We'll come back to it.
Okay.
And now we're going to get it out of here. We're going to get this all out of here. Okay. Providers, probably. See, all of this, again, this needs to all go into, how about I'll move all of this as well. We'll talk about key administration in the other one, because again, this is.
Okay.
Again, it's all good considerations. I just want to make sure that we have clean separation of duties. Okay. Then we get out of there. The only AVS provider requirement here is whenever you deploy a new workload, you need to update your AVS with the policy saying the new workload is now available. And then eventually you need to go and remove your older workload. But we have a pattern for this. So again, we go here, there is a workload upgrade. Now it's a pattern. So it's one thing to govern the payload itself, And this is the stuff we already discussed. But now, as you deploy the workload, you need to basically, there is a document here, the workload upgrades, I'll show you what it does. It's actually a simple one. But it talks about, there is probably a diagram if I remember correctly. Yeah, there you go. So see, you build a new image, then you roll out the image, and then you add new image measurements to AVS policy. And if successful, you remove old image. Once you upgrade, you see all of this stuff is already handled here. Now we can add more things to here. But again, it's separate. I'm trying to basically keep every document very focused.
Yeah, but my only concern there is for me, the AVS provider is in the other one, the one checking the policies, right?
What do you mean checking the policies?
Well, if you go back to the other document,
Which one?
The attestation one you just showed, the pattern, that one, yeah, the workload update, right?
Mhm.
For me, remove all image measurements from AVS policy, and then basically somebody's checking against that policy, and with that, it's no longer valid. And the service which does that, the holding basically the set of policies which are valid and basically giving thumbs up, thumbs down, is for me the AVS provider. That's why I'm saying this part which you show here with that code change is the persona in the list for me, being the confidential application developer who needs to do this together with the persona which is not mentioned here, taking care of his deployment, right? And where he needs to validate that what the confidential application developer gave him as a new image, that he rolls it out, right? That's not done by the developer, at least in my world. And so
Yeah.
so that application developer manager would have the obligation to, after the tests are succeeded and whatever, add these to the AVS, and somebody needs to provide him the AVS because he's just compiling code, right?
Yeah. Right. So I'm trying to figure out how many patterns do we have, and how does it all fit? So we have AVS governance. So, right, so let me send you this link to this folder so you see all the, this way you're going to see all our patterns at a glance. And I just want to make sure that we have sort of, you know, everything that we do sits in a proper place. And by the way, if you need access, I'll grant you access.
Yeah, I need access. I just requested it.
I just got your request. I'm gonna give it to you right now. Here you go. I got it. Okay, so you'll see that we have all these different patterns, and now the patterns can refer to each other. That's perfectly fine. I just want to make sure that we have sort of, every one of them is like, they're kind of IT of drafts. They're narrowly focused on one area, they cover that area, and they refer out to everything else. Also, we have this personas draft or pattern. So these are the ecosystem participants. And if you believe that doesn't cover all the actors, then perhaps we can change it. But right now, it's a clean diagram, but maybe it needs to get messed up if there are additional sort of actors here that are not mentioned.
Right, and one of which is the one which we added as a companion of the AVS providers, which might be your certificate authority person, right?
Maybe.
Because as you are requesting the confidential application developer managers in his pipeline to sign things, he needs an authority to sign it, which then the sensitive data owner can validate again.
Oh, yeah. Okay. It's I'm a little loath to make this diagram too complicated. Maybe maybe inside the AVS providers bubble there may be a couple of different actors.
I agree. That's why we put in the changes which we did. We combined the AVS provider and said you either have an AVS provider or in a way a certificate authority with a chain is first and foremost similar. I wouldn't say is basically also with the similar responsibilities within that, and yeah.
Well, when we'll get, I would like to get international payload governance out of the done. We can say that this is covered under AVS governance pattern. Let's see. Yeah, I would prefer to just.
Okay, but that basically, for me, feels like we have that expectation of ecosystem participants, and the confidential payload governance basically with that boils down to what the persona confidential application development manager has to do.
Yes.
Because we basically now marked everybody else as being not affected and referring to their pattern.
Which, do you see a problem with that?
No, it was, I'm the new kid on the block here, right? I joined with that document and you asked me to look into personas, and I didn't even have access to the expectation of your ecosystem. And listening to you today, I understand more, and I wasn't aware that that's the path or the flow to go, that there are 7 other documents. And that's why we added stuff to this document, assuming that this is the document.
Right. Which is perfect, I think, because now we're coming to the same, sort of a shared understanding.
Right, but that would basically mean that the stuff we had under AVS and certificate authorities with the keys is something which we could either remove or duplicate into then the AFS persona and authority, because I think the AVS provider in specific, depending on which technology and implementation you have, has more and less concepts of certificate authority and key management within itself, right?
Yeah. Which again, now you have access to all the patterns, so feel free to take the pen and start adding things in there. Okay. Auditors. Should I say anything about auditors here other than what's looking at this document, expectations, ecosystem participants, auditors, basically everyone responds to them, right? So component vendors, hardware owners, AVS providers, like everyone responds to them. So I'm almost inclined to say that, auditors effectively, like, I guess I'm trying to see how do I add value? Like, this is basically saying that whatever these guys do, validate it. Like I
agree, right? I mean, that was again the flow, right? What do I have to provide to them as basically it was said what each delivers or expects. And so we basically try to write down what would be a basis of what they would expect. Of course, you can say what the others has to deliver, the other one expects, right?
Correct.
Besides that, I do think that the aspect where the auditor potentially has to provide something up front is that for efficiency, basically, an auditor should, of course, provide his expectation or any other not obvious aspects of documentation to the application development owners. So you could say, while the confidential application developer manager needs to document an evidence, you could say that actually the establish of what policies are there falls under the duty of the auditor to sign off, right? Otherwise, it's a loop, right? It is, and then that way we put the auditor a little bit at least into the loop to sign it off. And then you could basically mimic that and basically say the established he's signing off and the documented evidence he's validating, right?
Right. So I hear you. I hear you, right? Auditors have an active role in basically saying that, what their expectations are. Now, at the same time, when I say that this list of personas, they're all responsibilities to the auditors. So anything I'm like kind of inclined to, maybe take a look and see what can be salvaged from this paragraph, but I wouldn't be listing auditors as personas at all because auditors expect things. Like
right. But then the point is okay. Anyway, you wrote at the top as to do include what each delivers or expects, right?
Yeah, which is the one-to-one map. Like if you're expecting it, I better deliver it. And if I deliver it, then I wouldn't only do it if you expect it. But ultimately, this entire guide, the reason we create these patterns, well, some of it is to make it easy for people to, know what they're supposed to do. But another part of it is I would like these documents to go in front of people who write like FFIEC handbooks, etc. So they, this is the guide to the auditors as to what they can reasonably expect.
Right, but my only concern, if you boil it down to, do you want to boil it down to what the persona in that bubble needs to do in this context, or explaining the in and out boat errors? I mean, that's where I right now struggle. I'm fine if you say basically the confidential payload governance is actually the what does the confidential application developer has to do. I still think it is fair, if you go back to this picture you said, to articulate if the component owner is doing one to confidential application owner, shouldn't that then be basically mentioned in that persona section, right? So you can basically use that persona section to say, he expects 1, 3, 7, and he delivers 14 and 9.
Sure. Yes. How do we say that? That is yes, certainly.
So from that perspective, then you would boil it down that the application owner has basically the superset, but because then the vendor component vendors is not longer not affected, because then that one delivers the one, which is in the other solution pattern, publishing patches, addressing discovered vulnerability.
But that's not related to payload governance necessarily, right? That would be under different. That would be under workload upgrades.
No, I disagree, because we said before the confidential application developer manager has to continuously monitor it. And if his components vendors are not providing him with publishing patches, there's nothing he can do. And then he's stuck and the auditor will kick him.
Yeah, there is, by the way, the dependency management is not like your supply chain is not in this diagram, by the way, because your component vendors are specifically CPU vendors. So.
Right, but again, if your CPU vendor has an exploit that somebody found a way for a side channel attack,
yeah.
and you are not getting the update to the new version of the chip, right? Then your auditor will say this generation or this thing is no longer compliant. You as an application developer may no longer use that technology or that chip generation, or need to provide me evidence how you prevent your stuff running on that component.
Exactly. So yeah, I hear you. So perhaps one, again, this is the first pattern we're like going into like detail here. So this is like there's kind of a lot to learn. But one idea might be that we can have a section here, like, and I don't know if auditors is necessarily that section, but I can have a table basically saying, okay, from like referencing back this table and have a table like 1 blah, 2 blah, 3 blah, basically saying these are the kinds of things along these arrows. In the payload governance, these are the things like systematized by these like arrows. What you might
What are the ones that he cares about? Yeah,
the ones that you care about in the diagram.
Right, and I really think with that, for me, the confidential payload governance, we should really requote it more to what needs to be done by this persona or in that bubble, right? Because then it is also clear why basically in that document we can have as the key thing that the confidential application needs to do that. And as a support, he gets from the persona all the inbound arrows where we explain what he can expect from these for a working scenario, right?
Yeah.
And that way we can then say, and the confidential owner, there's nothing, or there's only this thing. All the other stuff he needs to do goes into this document. The other one goes into that. And I think then this makes sense. Then basically your linkages to the other governance patterns are right reverse going through the arrow to the ones where you expect something, or in case of the auditor, reference it there and say, okay, and then if you want to see the other side of the arrow, look in that document, right?
Okay. Do you want to take a crack at maybe authoring such a table?
Yeah, I'm not so sure whether I do it as a table, but yeah, let's.
Well, yeah, because the thing is, the table it would actually be good. So because along arrow 1, this is what you expect. Along arrow 3, that's what you expect. The ones that are not, involved, don't list them. But then we can have sort of at a glance summary.
So,
I mean, I can do it too. I can propose something. Not necessarily putting work on you, but if you think you know what how to phrase it best, then great. If not, I can take a crack at it. We're also past our allotted time.
So I just put a crack on the first, basically. If you go back to the confidential governance. So that way we would kind of like, if we now assume this document becomes the confidential application developers pattern, or the document for this persona, he gets to know what he needs to deliver, established document, you name it, and what he can expects by the difference to provide. So the component thing provides, and there I took as an example just what was under arrow 1 and you are the table. And you could have as the auditor expects, and then put what he expects as error 14.
I would not create, okay. I would not create patterns around bubbles in this. There may be some. So for instance, there is a pattern around how to govern an AVS. So, okay, in that case, it's similar to this picture. But there is a pattern around how do you roll out an update? And this is separate from payload governance. It's specifically targeted at, okay, so I already have my payload, but now I need to replace the old one with a new one. And it's, there is no bubble in here for that. So I still believe that we need to have a confidential payload governance document. And in there, they say, these are the personas involved, and this is what they expect of each other in the context of payload governance. But payload governance document is not the same as, this is what, application developers do. That's not all they do. That's a lot of what they do.
Okay. Yeah.
Or maybe you're right. Maybe there is a pattern basically around most of these bubbles. Let's just take a look at what patterns exist in this document, in this folder. So this is clearly AVS. Well, here's break and inspect. Break and inspect is going to be an interesting pattern because break and inspect is where you actually have to, by design, break confidentiality for traffic flow. And that's what banks do a lot. So, you know, this is not a bubble. This is not a one bubble on the thing.
Yeah, but for me, that would be fine, right? If we have some which have, basically we have 80% associated to that persona, and then have cross-persona patterns like break and inspect, where we then describe the remaining 20%. But I think otherwise we get into trouble to where do we write the basics they need to root, right?
Well,
And I think that's why we have so much discussion right now, right? Because
in that case, if you think it's a good idea, and if we agree it's a good idea to effectively write patterns around the bubbles, then the workload upgrades can fold into the confidential payload governance.
Right. Or if we say there's something, in our case, we have somewhere the auditor needs to sign off that the workload upgrade should do, then it's
well, workload upgrades is not something auditor cares about as much. It's more around how do you upgrade a workload and maintain high availability. This is not like, that's more of a SRE function than it is a compliance function. But governance is not just about compliance. Sometimes governance is just, you know, how do I ensure that my system continues to work just because it's you know, my business demands it, not just my auditors demand it. So maybe then by that logic, we should not be folding it because that's a separate sort of focused area that people need to, you know, again, workload upgrades happen all the time. So to put a pattern around it makes a lot of sense, even if auditors don't care. Like most time auditors don't care what your, you know, SLAs are.
okay. Okay, I would need to run now.
Okay.
Talk to you soon.
Thank you much for your help today.
You're welcome. Talk to you. Bye.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Cheers for now.